Alright, so I have been wanting to make this series for a while, and fuck it, we're just gonna do it. I was gonna do it as a YouTube video, but I will just do it here, and we will compile these all together. So if you're watching me on YouTube, hello. I want to talk about sin, namely the 7 deadly sins. Because there are a lot of misconceptions about the 7 deadly sins, and about sin in general, and what sin means. So let's go ahead and start there, because I feel like it's important to set the bedrock here before we start getting into what the 7 deadly sins are. So what is it? What is sin? Now, if you grew up in an evangelical household, the definition of sin you are largely probably used to is doing things the Bible tells you not to do based on our denomination's interpretation of the text. And I fucking hate that definition. I think it's very stupid. Now, with Catholic theology, things get a little more complex. There's lots of schools of thought there. If I got into all of them, we would be here all day. So I'm going to tell you the definition I am going to be using throughout this series. And I borrow these definitions from 2 different sources. The first is from Jewish theology, where sin is missing the mark. It is a thing that causes you to stray from the path of righteousness. The second piece of this is the Terry Pratchett definition that I have slightly modified. Terry Pratchett once said that sin is when you treat people like things. And I like to modify that and say that it is also when you treat things like people. So moving forward in the series, that is going to be the definition I am using of sin. Sins are things that make you stray from the path of righteousness, which, you can get back onto it. You have missed the mark, you've gone off the road, and you have to realize it, atone for it, and get back on. It is either that, or it is an emotion, or an urge, or a compulsion that causes you to treat people like things, or things as more important than people. And I wanted to set this baseline so we can take this into part 2, and you guys won't be bogged down with this, evangelical perception of what sin is and is not. Because that is a very frustrating experience for both of us, because it generally causes people to come in here and start throwing straw men at me, and then they're arguing with a theology I don't even believe in. So I wanted to start right off the bat for what I am going to be talking about when I say sin. But stay tuned for part 2. I will see you there. Welcome back to my series on the 7 deadly sins. And for this series, we are going to be utilizing the definition of sin that I mentioned in my last video. You can find that down here. And for the list of actual sins, I'm going to be utilizing Pope Gregory I's version. The list of sins has gone through revisions over the years, but this is the one that people are most familiar with, so I am going to be utilizing that, and those sins are as follows: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. And I am actually going to be starting at the bottom of that list with sloth. Sloth is probably my favorite of the sins to discuss, because while all of these I think are misunderstood in different ways, when it comes to misunderstanding these sins, I think sloth really takes the cake. Because when people think of sloth, generally what they will think of is laziness. They think of sleeping too much, procrastination, not having a job. And this is very incorrect. A better way to describe sloth is neglect of one's spiritual duties, as well as negligent breaches of the social contract. And I am going to actually move because I am in the sun and I am so hot right now. So we're just going to go into the shade, where I can actually think because I won't be sweating. Alright, that's better. So what do I mean by shirking spiritual duties and negligent breaches of the social contract? Basically, it is not caring about yourself or others. Now, that can be due to fear, it can be due to entitlement, it can be due to arrogance, it can be due to despair. But if those things are causing you to not care about yourself or others, that itself is the sin. This can include things like looking away from the injustices of the world, not helping people when you have the opportunity to do so, removing oneself from their social responsibilities. It is the "that's not my problem" mentality. The "I shouldn't have to take care of other people" mentality. It is general apathy, nihilism. And this can also be directed at yourself. It can be things like giving up on self-improvement, deciding not to grow or learn, not caring for our own bodies. I want to put that into the context of the definition of sin that we talked about in the first video. It causes you to stray away from the path of righteousness, and it causes you either to treat people like things or like things as important as people. When you engage in this kind of behavior, you no longer see yourself as part of a greater whole, where you have the responsibility to take care of others so that they can flourish within that whole, and so that you take care of yourself so that you can contribute to that whole. Sloth is not getting a job within capitalism. A lot of people can't do that. It is the active choice of deciding you have nothing to contribute. Another thing that is covered by this is cowardice. If you allow your fear to paralyze you to the point that you cannot contribute to the greater good, it is becoming so fearful of other people that you end up breaching the social contract because you are no longer choosing to find solidarity with them. You've decided that people are bad, people are scary, and you shouldn't have to go out and be part of society and show kindness to your neighbors because you are afraid of all of them. You are afraid to do the right thing. So, how do we overcome this? Well, we have to overcome our fear, our nihilism, our belief that we are unimportant, or that we are more important than others. We have to see ourselves as part of humanity and humanity as part of us. But I will see you in the next part. Hope you're enjoying this. Hello, and welcome back to my series on the 7 Deadly Sins. The previous 2 parts are down here. I do highly recommend at least watching the first video first, so that you are familiar with the definition of sin that I am working with, and don't start throwing straw men from your evangelical upbringing into my comment section. And the next sin that I would like to go over is wrath, typically categorized as anger. And I think most of us can agree, rage and violence are generally bad things. However, things start getting tricky when you start talking about righteous anger. Is righteous anger a sin? And I would say no. But that means we have to separate what is and is not righteous anger. And that can get real saucy real fast. So all I can do is give you how I would define these things, and you will, of course, have to look more into this and figure it out on your own. And here's how I would separate righteous anger from wrath. Is your motivator for this anger love for your fellow man, or is it vengeance? And figuring that out is something you are going to have to really think about, because sometimes vengeance can masquerade as righteous anger. You have to ask yourself questions like, what do I care more about? That the bad person is punished, or that my neighbor is no longer persecuted? Do I want to see another person get what is coming to them, or do I want freedom for myself and other people? Because if that love is not the motivator, you are going to miss the mark. You are going to blast out in all directions. You are going to lose sight of what the actual goal is, which is justice. It's justice, it's liberation. Because a bad person being punished does not necessarily accomplish the goal of your neighbor being free. Now, that is not to say that sometimes when people engage in acts of cruelty, that those people don't need to in some way be separated from society. And we could debate all day about what that looks like. What I am saying is, sometimes people want bad people's heads on a spike more than they care about the people they are victimizing. And in people's quest for blood, they can end up doing things that hurt the people that they are trying to protect, because that wrath has no direction. It just wants to punish. It wants the catharsis of watching someone who has hurt other people get crushed. And wrath doesn't care if the victim gets crushed in the process. And I am not going to sit here and pretend that this is all a very easy thing to discern. It is not. Of all of the sins, I think this one is probably the most difficult to discern. There is a reason people have been discussing this for so long. And I, a random internet man, am not going to have all the answers on that. This is something you are going to have to look within yourself and find. And be honest with yourself. Brutally honest with yourself. Because sometimes when we are in our hurt, when we are in our pain and our anger, we feel like we are acting with righteous anger, when really we are just unleashing our wrath on whoever. When it is happening, wrath always feels justified, even if you look back and realize it wasn't. So it's important to take a moment and ask yourself these hard questions. But that is it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Hello, and welcome back to my series on the 7 deadly sins. And the next sin we are going to discuss is gluttony. And this is another one that is misunderstood. It has to be put into its historical context. Because a lot of times when people use the word gluttony, they are referring to overeating, overconsumption, being fat. And this is often how it is used in its historical context as well. However, we live in a very different world. In a lot of these historical contexts, we lived in a world where one famine could wipe out an entire population. We now live in a world where we could solve world hunger tomorrow. We have the technology to do that, whereas people who were talking about these things in their historical context did not. We now have the ability to feed every single human being on planet Earth, and to feed them well. So, how do we deal with this sin that is fundamentally rooted in overconsumption? Well, here's the thing. A lot of religious people really like to pay attention to the individual sin. They don't really like to pay attention to the societal sin as much. And at this point, gluttony is a societal sin. It is a sin that pretty much everyone in America bears. Obviously, excluding those who are facing food insecurity. It is not as much of a problem now that our food is luxurious. It is that it's mass-produced. It is that so much of it ends up in landfills. It is that it is tied to these profit motives. And it is tied to exploitative labor. You've probably heard there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. And that is largely true. The American model of food production and consumption is something it's very difficult to escape from. And you're not going to really be able to escape it by eating less. So when it comes to gluttony, this is largely going to have to be something we fix on a societal level. And it is going to mean coming to terms with our American identity. It's going to mean coming to terms with how we produce food, how we consume food, how much food gets thrown away, what our relationship to other countries is when it comes to food production. But it's not just food. It's also the clothing we wear, and our disconnect from the people who make our clothing a great deal of the time. And it's our relationship to how we consume media, and how we indulge our vices with it. Doom scrolling is a form of gluttony. So, what do we do? How do we atone for our sins of gluttony, or find our way back to the righteous path? Well, when it comes to consumption of media, I would highly recommend setting time limits for certain apps on your phone and making sure that you put the phone down and, enjoy the wonders of life. As for our food and clothing, I recommend buying secondhand. Learn to sew and utilize secondhand fabrics when you sew. Do your best to buy food and clothing from local artists if you can. People who are creating because they love to create instead of creating because they slave away 12 hours a day in a fucking factory. This also means eating in a way that you take care of your body as best you can. I know that can get very, very difficult when you're dealing with, a small amount of money, because processed and unhealthy foods are often a lot cheaper. So this is going to be one of those do the best you can things, and also recognize that we as Americans do have it better than a great deal of the world, and that our freedom from this gluttony is also dependent on other people's freedom from exploitation. You can also make sure that a certain portion of your income is spent donating to other people, ensuring that they have the things they need. And make sure you do this in a mindful way, that you aren't just giving the poor your hand-me-downs or whatever's in the back of your pantry. Ultimately, though, as much as these things can help, and you should do them, this really it's baked into the American system. And that is going to have to be completely rooted out and redone. So, do your best to consume wisely, friends. And I will see you in the next video. Alright, welcome back to our series on the 7 deadly sins. And the next sin I want to talk about is pride. Now, this is one that the conservatives will get themselves all tied in knots about because of pride parades. Because to conservative Christians, being gay is the only sin. Like, really and truly. It's being gay and women who have more than one partner. Those are the only sins. Everything else is on the table, apparently. Oh, and abortion. That's a sin, too. There are 3 sins, and they all have to do with punishing femininity. But I digress. So let's talk about the sin of pride and what it actually is. because it certainly isn't pride parades. There are plenty of times when human beings are proud in a good way. For example, when your community that has been historically oppressed has some sort of accomplishment. Or, if you go to a school play and you're, proud of your children. And you should be proud of your children. Like, that's good for their self-esteem. But there are forms of pride that are not good, that are sinful. And they namely revolve around things like arrogance and stubbornness. Again, we're going to come back to that definition of sin we talked about in the first video. They cause you to treat people like things or things like people. And what the sinful version of pride comes down to is thinking you are better than others in some way. Either that you're right and they're wrong, being unwilling to own up to a mistake, thinking you are smarter than other people, and in its worst form, thinking that you are somehow superior in terms of your race or gender or sexuality. And that is the difference between white pride and black pride. Black pride is rooted in the accomplishments of a marginalized community. White pride is rooted in superiority of white people over any other race. You are working with two fundamentally different definitions of pride, one that is sinful and one that isn't. Because black pride and gay pride, they don't treat people like things, where white pride does, straight pride does. The root of the sinful version of pride is, at the end of the day, superiority. This kind of pride makes you double down on things you may be wrong about. It doesn't allow you to see the perspective of other people. You end up engaging in acts of hubris. And anytime you believe that a group of people is not as good as you are, that is going to lead to you treating people like things. And conservatives will willfully misunderstand this because they want to keep believing they're better than other people. And their stubbornness, their pride, it won't allow them to admit that they are wrong about that. Alright, welcome back to our series on the 7 deadly sins. And in this video, I want to talk about envy. And envy essentially comes down to uncontrollable desire for things that other people have. And quite obviously, the cure for envy, the opposite of envy, is gratitude. Now, years ago, I made a video on gratitude. It was up on my YouTube channel. I may remake it. Boy howdy, I was pre-transition and nobody wanted to see that. But it was about how thankfulness and gratitude, in American society, those things have been used against us. They have been used by incredibly greedy people to make excuses for their immense greed. So, for example, when workers try to unionize, people would come in and be like, oh, you're ungrateful. When people try to make the world better, there's always someone to tell you that you're ungrateful. And so I am here to tell you that fighting for basic human rights, fighting to make the world a better place, is not the same as ingratitude. But I think that this has been used against us so often that we have kind of trapped ourselves. Because I think that there is a tendency for some of us to not be thankful, to not be grateful, to not see the good in our lives, because so often gratitude has been used against us. We've been kind of painted as just being envious of the wealth and success of other people. That now, when opportunities to practice thankfulness and practice gratitude, like real, genuine thankfulness and gratitude come along, we almost kind of feel weird about it. But we should practice that, because the vast majority of us are very blessed in a lot of ways. I mean, the great majority of my audience is American. Even if we are in the shitter in this country, we still have it a lot better than a lot of other people, namely the people that our country is fucked over. Part of the reason that gratitude is so important is because it allows us to see what we have and thus what we want other people to have too. I'm grateful for the fact that I have food in my house, so I want everyone to have food in their house. But there are certainly moments that I just feel outright envy. I think everyone does. Or we have the desire to be envied. And neither of those things are good. There are certainly moments where I'm like, I wish I had a real, big, nice church that I was, the minister of, instead of, primarily working online. And that is envy, because this is the lot that I've been given, and what I do with it is good. And I shouldn't wish that I was like other people. What I need to do is look at the people that I look up to who have the things that I want and appreciate them and go, wow, I want to be like that. Envy has a desire to take away. Appreciation and inspiration build new things. I know a lot of trans people have problems with this too. A lot of trans people will look at, trans people who are really passing, who have bodies that they really want, or talents or skills that they will never have. And I think a lot of, us want to look at those people and tear them down instead of going, wow, this person is really inspirational to me, and I want to do something that creates as much of an impact on the world as they have had on me. So go out, be grateful, be thankful, be inspired by other people, because you not having what other people have, a lot of the time that's just because you're different and you have something different to offer up, because the world is full of all different people who have all different things, and that's wonderful. Welcome back to my series on the 7 deadly sins, and today we're going to be talking about greed. So what is greed? Greed is the insatiable desire for material gain to the point of detriment to yourself and others. And this is a sin that we really need to start treating like a sin again, like on a societal level. Because American society does not treat greed as a sin. It treats it as aspirational. And it has always been this way a bit in American society because we are, based around the idea of like the free market. And we were, built on slavery, which is an entire economic system that is based around treating people like objects. So American greed is nothing new. But for a long time in American history, greed was still seen as kind of a social faux pas. No one really wanted to admit to their greed until the 80s. And then the social stigma of greed just flew out the window entirely. It could be summed up in one phrase from Gordon Gekko: greed is good. And once we decided that greed was good, once we started seeing greed as genuinely aspirational, it was kind of all downhill. Because there's not going to be any punishment for something people don't even see as a sin. And we see the end result of that, which is billionaires. No one earned billionaire status. One only becomes a billionaire because of greed. Either because you have exploited people in a way that has granted you that much money, or because you've been unwilling to spend or to give away the money that you have. The only way to become a billionaire is to treat people like things, or to treat things as more important than people. Having that much wealth is a sin in and of itself. There have been many Christians throughout history who have kind of lived by the belief that if you have 2 coats, you are stealing one from the poor. Now, obviously, that is something that would seem very extreme to most Americans. But I will say this: if you're going to have 2 coats, try to make sure that everyone in your community has one. And if you have more money for coats than you will ever be able to spend, I fear for your eternal soul. There are people in the world today who could provide coats to every single person on earth, who could end world hunger tomorrow. They are choosing not to, and they are doing that out of greed. So as we are thinking of ways that we want to rebuild society, as we are thinking about the future we want to see, we need to think about a world where greed is handled accordingly. Because right now, we don't live in a world where greed is treated as a sin. And that has got to change if anything's going to get any better. Welcome back to my series on the 7 deadly sins. And in this video, we are going to talk about lust. So what is lust? Now, if you ask an evangelical, they'll probably just say it's, being gay, or women having any libido whatsoever. But that is not what lust is. Remember our definition of sin: treating people like things, or things like people. Lust is any act where your desire, usually desire for schmecks, causes you to treat people like things, or things like people. So, as long as you are not in a relationship where you are treating people like things, or things like people, I don't see the problem with it. Partnership should be a place where people feel safe, they feel loved, they feel heard and listened to, and they feel equal. And lust can encompass everything from breaches of consent to just being a dick partner, not taking your partner's needs and desires into consideration. So being gay is not a sin, but if you are in any relationship, gay or straight, where you are not treating each other with respect, that becomes a problem. Now, there are some gray areas. For example, schmex work. Now, I want to be very clear on this. I do not think that my own personal religious beliefs should impact what is legal or how anyone else should be treated. But as someone who has been in the industry, I do have conflicted feelings about schmex work. Because here's the thing. I understand that we live under capitalism, people gotta make their paper. So I would never ever judge anyone for being in this industry. Like I said, I was in the industry. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. I swear, every time I try to make this video, my old ass fucking neighbors come outside. And I don't want them to hear me making a video about spicy accounting. All right, I'm gonna sit in the grass on the other side of the house. But anyway, yeah, get your paper. We live under capitalism. Do what you gotta do to pay them bills. That being said, in a perfect world, I think that people should be able to do that freely. I think that consent starts to get kind of shaky once money is involved. It is the money I have a problem with. Because like I said, my definition of sin is treating people like things or things like people. I don't think that people should be commodified. And I do think of this particular act as being sacred and something that 2 or more people should engage in because they have respect for one another and want to make each other happy and feel pleasure. But like I said, that is just kind of like my personal opinion on the matter. And living in the system we do now, I'm not going to judge anybody for doing it. I don't think that the sin is receiving payment for such a thing. I think it's paying for it. The other thing that can get kind of shaky is like corn. Again, it's something I don't really have a problem with. I don't by any means think it should be banned. But if you find that your corn habits are taking the place of actual human intimacy, you may want to do a check-in with yourself on that. And that's just kind of where I'm at with the whole thing. I try to keep like a real judgment-free mindset around this stuff because we live in a really fucking complicated world. And so I generally stick to like, if you are not hurting another person, it is not my fucking business. And I think that's kind of the way everybody should be, you know? Like everybody's an adult in this situation. Everybody's having fun. Good on you. Godspeed. Not something I or the government need to be involved in. This is the end of my 7 Deadly Sins series. I hope you liked it.